My husband texted, "I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer." But when I canceled her credit card and cut all financial support, his lawyer called me frantically 72 hours later, begging for mercy. Subscribe to the channel and like the video to see more stories like this 42 years old. That number represents strength, achievements, and experience. My name is Sarah, and for the past 15 years, I've been the Chief Financial Officer at Henderson & Associates, one of Denver's most prestigious accounting firms. My house in Lakewood has always been my pride, a symbol of everything I built with my own hands. A beautiful 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, granite countertops, and a 3-car garage that I paid for entirely myself. I married David when I was 28, back when I was just starting my career and he was a charming sales representative at a tech startup. He had this infectious smile and grand dreams about building his own business empire. "Sarah, you're going to be so proud of me," he used to say, his eyes lighting up whenever he talked about his future plans. "One day, I'll be the one taking care of you." Those early years were tough, but happy. I was working 60-hour weeks, climbing the corporate ladder while David bounced between different sales jobs, always chasing the next big opportunity. When I got promoted to senior financial analyst, David threw me a surprise party. "My brilliant wife," he announced to everyone, raising his glass. "She's going to change our whole life." And I did change our life. Every promotion came with a salary increase, and I was smart about it. I invested in real estate, opened multiple savings accounts, built a portfolio that most people twice my age would envy. By the time I became CFO 3 years ago, we had a combined net worth approaching $3 million. The house was worth $680,000, paid off completely. No mortgage, no debt, just pure financial freedom. David's entrepreneurial dreams never quite materialized the way he hoped. His various business ventures, an online marketing company, a consulting firm, a brief stint trying to flip houses, they all struggled, but I never complained. I loved him, and I believed in supporting your spouse through thick and thin. "Don't worry about it," I'd tell him after each failed venture. "We're a team. Your success is my success." What I didn't realize at the time was how much the financial dynamic was affecting him. I was bringing in $185,000 a year, while David's income fluctuated between $35,000 and $45,000 depending on his current project. I handled all our investments, managed our budget, made the major financial decisions. I thought I was being helpful, taking that burden off his shoulders. David started spending more time at his friend Marcus's house about 2 years ago. Marcus was recently divorced and living the bachelor lifestyle in a downtown condo. "Just guys' night," David would explain when he'd come home late smelling like whiskey and cigarettes. "Marcus is going through a rough time. You know how it is." I trusted him completely. In 14 years of marriage, David had never given me a reason not to. Sure, he could be moody sometimes, especially when his business deals fell through, but he was never dishonest, never secretive, or so I believed. The first red flag came 6 months ago during a dinner party at our neighbor's house. I was talking to Linda about refinancing options when David interrupted our conversation. "Sarah's the money expert in our family," he said with a bitter edge to his voice that I'd never heard before. "I'm just the guy who gets to live in her house and drive her cars." Everyone laughed awkwardly. Linda tried to smooth things over. "Oh, David, you two are such a power couple. Sarah's financial success is your success too." But David's jaw tightened. "Right, my success." He walked away to get another beer, leaving me standing there with a knot forming in my stomach. That night, I asked him about it. "Honey, what was that comment about earlier? You seemed upset." David was already in bed, his back turned to me. "Nothing, Sarah, just tired. Long day." But it wasn't nothing. Over the next few months, little comments started creeping into our conversations. When I mentioned wanting to renovate the master bathroom, he said, "Well, it's your money, your house. Do whatever you want." When I suggested we take a vacation to Europe, he responded, "I can't afford Europe, but I'm sure you can cover it like you cover everything else." The comments hurt, but I tried to understand. I knew it couldn't be easy being married to someone who out-earned you by such a significant margin. I started being more careful about how I discussed money, tried to phrase things as our decisions rather than my decisions, but nothing seemed to help. 3 months ago, David started staying out later and later. Working on a new business plan with Marcus became his standard excuse. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until 2 or 3 in the morning, and when I'd wake up to ask how it went, he'd just mumble something about investor meetings and fall asleep. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that my husband of 14 years was just going through a rough patch, dealing with some wounded pride about our financial situation. I made excuses for his behavior, rationalized every late night and every bitter comment. But then last Tuesday happened. I was working late at the office, finishing up quarterly reports, when I realized I'd left my laptop charger at home. It was 9 p.m., and David had texted earlier saying he was having dinner with Marcus, so I figured I'd just swing by quickly to grab it. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, which struck me as odd since David usually left lights on when he went out. I used my key to enter through the front door, calling out, "David?" just in case he'd come home early. No response. But as I headed upstairs to get my charger from the bedroom, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My husband's voice, coming from his home office, talking quietly on the phone. I froze on the staircase, my heart pounding. David was supposed to be at dinner with Marcus. Why was he here? Why were all the lights off? And why was he talking in hushed tones like he was hiding something? I crept closer to the office door, which was cracked open just enough for me to hear his voice clearly. No, she has no idea, David was saying. Sarah's too trusting, too busy with her precious career to notice what's really going on. My hands started shaking. Who was he talking to? And what did he mean? I had no idea. About what? The lawyer says we need to be careful about the timing, David continued. She controls most of the assets, so we have to make sure everything's documented properly before we make the move. Lawyer? What lawyer? And what move? Yeah, I know it's been hard keeping this secret, but it'll all be worth it soon. Once the divorce papers are filed, we can finally be together openly. The word divorce hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the banister to keep from falling down the stairs. My husband who I'd supported and loved and built a life with, was planning to divorce me. And apparently, he was doing it with someone else, someone he'd been keeping secret. But the next words out of his mouth made everything so much worse. I love you too, Jessica. Just a little while longer, and then Sarah's money won't be able to control our lives anymore. I stood frozen on that staircase for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd just heard. Jessica. Who the hell was Jessica? And how long had my husband been planning to destroy our marriage while I slept peacefully beside him every night? David's voice continued drifting from the office, each word like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. The prenup isn't going to be a problem, he was saying. We didn't have much when we got married, and my lawyer says Colorado is an equitable distribution state. I should be entitled to half of everything she's accumulated during the marriage. Half of everything I'd accumulated. Not we'd accumulated. I'd accumulated. He was talking about my 15 years of hard work, my careful investments, my strategic financial planning, like it was just some pot of gold he was entitled to grab. Yeah, I know it seems cold, David continued, and I could hear him moving around the office, probably pacing like he did when he was nervous. But Sarah made her choices. She chose her career over our relationship. She chose being the breadwinner over being a real wife. I tried to make it work, Jessica, but I can't live in her shadow anymore. A real wife. The phrase echoed in my head like a slap. Apparently, working my ass off to provide for our family, to build our wealth, to secure our future. That made me less of a real wife in his eyes. I forced myself to move, creeping back down the stairs as quietly as possible. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the banister. I needed to get out of there before David finished his call and discovered me. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out what the hell I was going to do with this information. I made it to my car and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, just trying to breathe. The rational part of my brain was telling me to march back in there and confront him immediately, demand answers, scream at him for his betrayal. But another part of me, the calculating, strategic part that had made me successful in business, whispered a different advice. Know your enemy before you engage. The next morning, David acted completely normal. He made coffee, kissed my cheek goodbye, and told me he'd be working late again with Marcus on the new project. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily it made me sick. How long had he been practicing this deception? That's fine, honey, I said, forcing a smile. I'll probably work late too. Big presentation on Friday. After David left for work, I called in sick to my office for the first time in 3 years. Then I did something I never thought I'd do in my life. I hired a private investigator. Rebecca Martinez came highly recommended from a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce 2 years earlier. She was a former police detective turned PI with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. When I explained the situation in her downtown office, she nodded knowingly. Honey, I've seen this story 100 times, Rebecca said, pulling out a legal pad. Successful woman, husband feeling emasculated, secret affair, divorce planning. The only variable is how elaborate the deception gets. I need to know everything, I told her. Who she is, how long it's been going on, what they're planning. I need evidence. Evidence costs money, Rebecca warned. Full surveillance, background checks, digital investigation. We're talking $5 to $10, zeros or 00, depending on how deep this goes. Money isn't a problem, I said, and it wasn't. Thanks to my careful financial planning, I could afford the best. Rebecca's investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, she called me with preliminary results that made my stomach drop. Jessica Reynolds, she said over the phone, 27 years old, works as a real estate agent with Pinnacle Properties. She's been seeing your husband for approximately 8 months. 8 months. While I was working overtime to secure a major client contract that would boost our household income by another $30,000, my husband was building a relationship with a woman 15 years younger than me. There's more, Rebecca continued. I've got photos of them at restaurants, a hotel in Boulder, her apartment complex. But here's the interesting part. She's not just some random affair. She's Marcus Webb's ex-girlfriend. Marcus, David's supposed best friend, the guy who was supposedly helping him with business ventures. The pieces started clicking together in a way that made me feel physically sick. So Marcus introduced them? I asked. More than that. From what I've observed, Marcus is actively coaching your husband through this. They meet regularly at Marcus's condo, and I've got surveillance showing Jessica there too. It looks like Marcus went through a similar situation with his own divorce 2 years ago. ago. And now he's helping your husband replicate his strategy. That evening, David came home at his usual late hour, slipping into bed beside me like nothing had changed. I pretended to be asleep, but every fiber of my being was screaming. This man who I'd loved and trusted and built a life with had been systematically planning my destruction for months. The next day brought more devastating revelations. Rebecca had managed to dig deeper into Jessica's background, and what she found was calculated in a way that took my breath away. She's not just young and pretty, Rebecca explained during our meeting. Jessica Reynolds is smart, business degree from CU Boulder, specializes in high-end real estate, very ambitious. This isn't some mindless fling your husband is having. This woman sees an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Think about it. She's 27, building a career in real estate. Your husband is 44, about to potentially walk away with a significant divorce settlement from a very successful wife. In her mind, she's not just getting a boyfriend, she's getting a business partner with capital. The photos Rebecca showed me made everything crystal clear. David and Jessica at expensive restaurants I couldn't afford on his salary. Jessica wearing jewelry that looked suspiciously like pieces that had gone missing from my collection. David looking happier and more confident than I'd seen him in years. But the most damning evidence came from Rebecca's digital investigation. She'd managed to access some of David's communication through methods she assured me were legally obtained, and what she found was a detailed timeline of deception. The affair had started at a real estate networking event that Marcus had dragged David to. Jessica had approached David specifically after learning about his financial situation, or rather about my financial situation. She'd done her homework, knew exactly who she was targeting. Their text conversations revealed a level of manipulation that was breathtaking. Jessica positioning herself as the supportive woman who believed in David's potential, unlike his controlling wife who emasculated him with her success. She fed his resentment, validated his wounded pride, and slowly convinced him that he deserved better. "Poor baby," one of her texts read. "You've been carrying that woman for years while she takes all the credit. You deserve someone who appreciates what a strong, capable man you are." Another text was even more explicit. "When you're free from all that baggage, we can build something real together. I know investors who would love to back the right kind of business venture, especially with the right capital behind it." The right capital, my capital. But the text that made my hands shake with rage was from David to Jessica. "Sarah thinks she's so smart with her fancy job and her investments, but she has no idea what's coming. My lawyer says if we play this right, I'll walk away with enough to start fresh. Just me and you, babe. No more living in her shadow. No more living in her shadow." 15 years of supporting this man, believing in him, building a life together, and he saw it as living in my shadow. That night, David came home with flowers. Grocery store roses, the cheap kind he bought when he felt guilty about something. "Just because," he said, kissing my cheek. "I know I've been working a lot lately. Want to go out to dinner this weekend? Just the two of us?" I looked at this man I'd shared my bed with for 14 years, this man who was planning to betray me in the most devastating way possible, and I smiled. "That sounds lovely, honey. I'd like that very much." But inside, I was already planning. David thought he was the only one who could play games. He thought I was too trusting, too naive, too focused on my career to notice what was happening right under my nose. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The next morning, after David left for his client meeting, which I now knew was actually a romantic lunch with Jessica, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First, I called my lawyer. Then I called my financial advisor. Finally, I called Rebecca Martinez. "I hope you're ready for phase 2, I told Rebecca, "because if my husband wants to play hardball, I'm going to show him what hardball really looks like." My lawyer, Patricia Chen, had handled my business contracts for 5 years, but I'd never needed her for personal matters before. When I walked into her office that Thursday morning, her expression shifted from friendly professionalism to sharp concern the moment I started explaining the situation. "Sarah, I need you to understand something very clearly," Patricia said, leaning forward across her mahogany desk. "What you're describing isn't just adultery. This sounds like a coordinated financial scheme. Your husband and his accomplices are planning to use Colorado's equitable distribution laws to essentially steal the wealth you've accumulated through your own efforts." The word steal hit me hard, but she was right. That's exactly what this was. "What are my options?" I asked. Patricia pulled out a thick file folder. "Well, the good news is that you came to me before he filed anything. That gives us significant strategic advantages. The bad news is that he's probably right about Colorado's laws. Without a post-nuptial agreement, he could be entitled to a substantial portion of your assets acquired during the marriage." My heart sank. "So he wins? He gets to cheat on me and walk away with my money?" "I didn't say that," Patricia smiled grimly. "I said he could be entitled to assets acquired during the marriage, but there are ways to. Minimize what qualifies as marital assets. Ways to protect yourself that are completely legal, if we act quickly and carefully." She spent the next hour explaining strategies I never knew existed. Asset transfers, business restructuring, debt management tactics. My head was spinning by the time she finished. "But here's the most important part," Patricia concluded. "None of this works if he gets suspicious. You need to act completely normal while we put these protections in place. Can you do that?" I thought about the past 8 months of David's lies, his late nights with Jessica, his bitter comments about my success. I've been acting normal while my husband destroyed our marriage behind my back. I think I can manage a few more more weeks. My next stop was my financial advisor, Kenneth Rodriguez. Ken had been managing my investment portfolio for 6 years, and he knew every detail of our financial picture. When I explained what David was planning, his reaction was immediate and intense. "That bastard," Ken said, which shocked me because I'd never heard him use profanity before. "Sarah, you've worked your ass off to build this wealth. You've been the sole breadwinner. You've made every smart financial decision, and now he wants to cash out half of it to fund his midlife crisis? Can he really get half of everything?" Ken pulled up my portfolio on his computer screen. $2, $3 million in combined assets. The house, your retirement accounts, the stock portfolio, the rental property in Aurora. If he plays this right, he could walk away with over $1 million. The number made me feel sick. $1 million. Enough for David and Jessica to start whatever life they were planning, funded entirely by my decades of hard work. But, Ken continued, there are things we can do to minimize the damage. Legitimate financial moves that protect your interests. It's going to require some careful timing and absolute discretion. That evening, I sat across from David at dinner, watching him cut his steak while he told me about his productive day of meetings. Every word out of his mouth was a lie, but I smiled and nodded and asked interested questions about his fake business ventures. "You seem different lately," David said suddenly, looking up from his plate. "More attentive, I guess. It's nice." The irony was suffocating. Now that I knew he was planning to destroy our marriage, I was suddenly a better wife in his eyes because I was paying attention to his lies. "I've been thinking about what you said at the Hendersons' party," I lied smoothly. "About feeling overshadowed by my career. I don't want you to feel that way, David. You're my husband. Your happiness matters to me." His face softened in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Really? Because sometimes I feel like your work is more important to you than our relationship." "Never," I said, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "We're a team. We always have been." That night, David made love to me with more passion than he'd shown in over a year. Afterward, as he held me close, he whispered, "I love you, Sarah. I know I haven't been showing it lately, but I do." I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, feeling his breath on my shoulder, and wondered how someone could lie so completely and so convincingly. In just a few hours, he'd probably be texting Jessica about how guilty he felt or how eager he was for their real life to begin. But I was learning to lie convincingly too. The next week brought revelations that made David's betrayal even worse. Rebecca had managed to dig deeper into the conspiracy, and what she found was a level of premeditation that took my breath away. "Your husband has been planning this for almost a year," Rebecca told me over coffee at a small cafe downtown. "Long before the affair with Jessica started. I found evidence that he consulted with a divorce attorney back in March of last year." March? I tried to remember what was happening in our marriage around that time, but that was right after I got promoted to CFO. We celebrated. He seemed happy for me. On the surface, maybe, but according to my sources, that promotion was actually his breaking point. "Your salary jumped to $185,000, making the income gap even wider." That's when he started researching his options. Rebecca slid a manila folder across the table. "It gets worse. Marcus Webb went through his divorce 2 years ago and walked away with $800 from his ex-wife's pharmaceutical career. He's been coaching your husband on exactly how to replicate his strategy." The folder contained printouts of online forum posts, legal research queries, and consultation notes. David had been methodically studying how to maximize his divorce settlement for months before he ever met Jessica. So the affair isn't the cause of the divorce, I realized. The affair is just part of the strategy. Exactly. Jessica isn't just his mistress, she's his exit plan. A younger woman who validates his wounded ego while also providing business connections for whatever venture he's planning to start with your money. But the most damaging evidence was still coming. Rebecca had discovered that David had already taken preliminary steps to hide some of our assets. Small transfers, business expenses that didn't quite add up, investment opportunities that seemed suspiciously vague. "He's been siphoning money for months," Rebecca explained. "Nothing dramatic enough to trigger suspicion, but enough to build a little nest egg. I estimate he's already moved about $35, zero into accounts you don't know about. $35,000. Money I'd earned, money I'd trusted him to manage responsibly as part of our household budget, and he'd been stealing it to fund his affair and his divorce plans. That night, I made a decision that would change everything." David was in his office, supposedly working on proposals, but probably texting Jessica, when I knocked on the door. "Come in," he called. I entered with 2 glasses of wine, his favorite Cabernet Sauvignon that we usually saved for special occasions. "I thought you might want a break," I said, handing him a glass. David looked surprised, but pleased. "You're being so thoughtful lately." "I appreciate it, Sarah. I really do." We sat together on the small couch in his office, sipping wine and talking about nothing important. David relaxed completely, probably thinking he'd successfully fooled his naive wife once again. "David," I said after we'd finished our wine, "can I ask you something? Of course. If you could change anything about our marriage, what would it be? David's expression grew serious. For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth. Confess everything. Give us a chance to work through our problems honestly. Instead, he took my hand and said, "Nothing, Sarah. I wouldn't change anything. You're the best wife a man could ask for." The lie was so complete, so effortless, that something inside me finally snapped. This man was planning to destroy my life while looking me in the eye and telling me I was the best wife he could ask for. "I'm glad to hear that," I said, standing up, "because I'd hate to think you were unhappy." After David went to bed, I stayed up until 3 a.m. making phone calls to Patricia Chen, Kenneth Rodriguez, and several other professionals whose services I was about to need. By morning, I had a plan, not just to protect my assets, but to ensure that David's betrayal would cost him far more than he ever imagined. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the loving, attentive wife while secretly implementing a comprehensive strategy to protect everything I'd worked for. David noticed my improved mood and attributed it to his manipulations working. "You seem really happy lately," he commented one evening as I hummed while making dinner. "I am happy," I told him truthfully. "I feel like I finally understand our relationship clearly." What I understood was that my marriage was over, had been over for months, and that my husband saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be exploited. But I also understood something David had severely underestimated. I hadn't become a successful CFO by being naive or passive. I'd built my career by being smarter, more strategic, and more ruthless than the people who tried to take advantage of me. David thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He was about to learn that I'd been playing chess all along, and I was several moves ahead of him. The text message that would start the endgame was going to come soon. I could feel David building up to it, probably waiting for Jessica to give him the final push or for his lawyer to confirm their strategy was ready. When that text came, David expected his trusting wife to be devastated, confused, and vulnerable to manipulation during the divorce proceedings. Instead, he was going to discover that his trusting wife had spent weeks preparing for war. The text came on a Wednesday morning at 11:47 a.m. I was in a budget meeting with my department heads when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw David's name on the screen. "I want a divorce. All communication is through my lawyer. His name is Richard Stone with Stone & Associates. Don't try to contact me directly." That was it. 14 years of marriage ended with a text message that was shorter than most grocery lists. No explanation, no attempt at discussion, no acknowledgement of the life we'd built together. My hands were completely steady as I typed back, "Understood." The other executives in the meeting were still discussing quarterly projections, completely unaware that my world had just officially ended. But the strange thing was, I felt calm, almost relieved. The waiting was over. The game David thought he was playing could finally begin, except he had no idea that I'd already won. I excused myself from the meeting and walked to my office, closing the door behind me. Then I made the first of several phone calls that would destroy David's carefully laid plans. "Patricia, it's Sarah. He just filed. Are we ready?" "We've been ready for 2 weeks," my lawyer replied. "Operation Financial Fortress is a go. I'll have our response filed by end of business today." "And Kenneth?" "Already executed the asset protection strategies we discussed. Your husband is going to be very surprised when he realizes what's left in the marital estate." I hung up and allowed myself a small smile. David thought he was being so clever, so strategic. He had no idea that while he was planning his betrayal, I'd been planning his destruction. The next call came exactly 47 minutes later. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Richard Stone, your husband's attorney. I think we need to talk." His voice was already strained, which told me everything I needed to know. Patricia had filed our response, and David's legal team was already realizing they'd walked into a trap. "I'm sorry, Mr. Stone, but I can't discuss this with you directly. All communication needs to go through my attorney, Patricia Chen with Chen & Associates. I'm sure you understand." I hung up before he could respond. Let him get a taste of his own medicine. David called 16 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again and again. By 2 p.m., he'd called 11 times and sent 7 increasingly frantic texts. "Sarah, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Call me back." "What the hell did you do? Call me now." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I finished my workday, attended 2 more meetings, and reviewed a contract proposal, business as usual. At 5:30 p.m., I drove home to find David's car in the driveway. He was pacing on the front porch like a caged animal, his hair disheveled and his face red with anger. "Sarah!" he shouted the moment he saw me. "What the fuck did you do?" I walked calmly to the front door, key in hand. "I'm sorry, David, but I thought all communication was supposed to go through your lawyer. That's what your text said. Don't play games with me." His voice was shaking with rage. "My lawyer says you've frozen everything. The accounts, the credit cards, everything. He says you filed some kind of emergency motion claiming I was dissipating assets." I turned to face him, and for the first time in weeks, I let my real feelings show on my face. The anger, the betrayal, the cold fury of a woman who'd been systematically deceived by the person she'd trusted most. "Dissipating assets?" I said quietly. "You mean like the $35,000 you've stolen from our joint accounts over the past 8 months to fund your affair with Jessica Reynolds?" David's face went white. "How did you..." I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because I have bank records, David. I have photographs. I have text messages between you and your little girlfriend talking about how you're going to use my money to start your new life together. Sarah, listen to me. No, you listen to me, I interrupted, my voice rising. I know about Marcus coaching you through this divorce strategy. I know about the lawyer consultations you started last March. I know about every restaurant you've taken her to, every hotel room you've rented, every lie you've told me while planning to destroy the life I built. David stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You hired someone to spy on me? I hired someone to investigate what my husband was doing with our money while he was supposedly working late every night. Turns out he was working all right. Working on stealing everything I've spent 15 years building. It's not stealing, David exploded. It's marriage. It's community property. I'm entitled to half of everything. Entitled, I repeated, tasting the word. You think you're entitled to the money I earned while you were failing at business after business? You think you're entitled to profit from the career you spent 2 years resenting and belittling? I supported your career. You supported my career by spending the money it generated while plotting to steal more of it. That's not support, David. That's parasitism. David's lawyer must have briefed him on their problems, because his next words revealed just how desperate their situation was. Sarah, be reasonable. We can work this out without lawyers. You don't want this to get ugly. Oh, it's already ugly, I said. It got ugly when you started fucking a 27-year-old real estate agent while telling me I wasn't a real wife because I out-earned you. It got ugly when you and Marcus spent months planning how to maximize your theft of my assets. It got ugly when you decided to end our marriage with a text message. Jessica isn't. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. She's a gold digger who saw an opportunity to get her hands on a successful woman's money through a weak, bitter man having a midlife crisis, and you were stupid enough to fall for it. David's face was cycling through emotions: anger, fear, desperation, and something that might have been shame. Sarah, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I made mistakes, but mistakes? I laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. David, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to lie to me for 8 months. You chose to steal our money. You chose to plan my financial destruction while I cooked your dinner and warmed your bed. Those weren't mistakes. They were calculated betrayals. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice breaking. What's it going to take to end this? I want you to understand something very clearly, I said, stepping closer to him. You thought you were playing games with some naive housewife who would cry and beg and accept whatever scraps you threw her. But you weren't married to a housewife, David. You were married to a chief financial officer who's been outmaneuvering people like you for 15 years. I pulled out my phone and showed him a document Patricia had sent me earlier. This is a forensic accounting report detailing every penny you've stolen. This is a comprehensive asset analysis showing exactly what you're entitled to, which, thanks to some very legal financial restructuring over the past 3 weeks, is significantly less than you thought. David's eyes widened as he read. This can't be legal. Everything on that list is completely legal. See, while you were planning to steal from me, I was planning to protect myself. The difference is, my plan actually works. You can't leave me with nothing. I'm not leaving you with nothing. You'll get exactly what you're legally entitled to, based on Colorado's equitable distribution laws applied to what actually constitutes marital assets, which, as it turns out, is a lot less than you and your little girlfriend were counting on. David stared at the document, his face growing paler by the second. How much? Read it yourself, but I'll give you a hint. It's not going to fund the luxury lifestyle you and Jessica were planning. The number at the bottom of the page was $127,000, not the million-plus David had been expecting, but a fraction of what he'd thought he could steal from me. This is impossible, he whispered. This is what happens when you try to outsmart someone who's actually smart, I replied. Did you really think I became a CFO by accident? Did you think I built our wealth through luck? I'm good at what I do, David. Very good. And what I do is manage money and outsmart people who try to take advantage of me. But Jessica said, the lawyer said, Jessica said whatever she thought would get her access to my money through you. And your lawyer told you what you wanted to hear so you'd pay his retainer fee. But I told my lawyer the truth, gave her all the facts, and asked her to protect my interests. Guess whose strategy worked better? David looked defeated, but then his face twisted with anger again. You think you're so smart. You think you've won, but you don't know everything, Sarah. There are things, like the fact that you've already moved in with Jessica, I interrupted, or the fact that she's been telling her friends at Pinnacle Properties that she's about to be set for life, or the fact that you two have already looked at a condo downtown that you plan to buy with my settlement money. David's mouth fell open. How could you possibly know that? Because I'm thorough, David. When someone tries to destroy my life, I make sure I understand exactly what they're planning before I destroy theirs. I walked to the front door and opened it. You need to leave now. This is my house, bought with my money, and you're no longer welcome here. Where am I supposed to go? I suggest Jessica's apartment. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to support you on her real estate agent salary while you wait for your share of our assets to be distributed. All $127,000 of it. As David walked toward his car, shoulders slumped in defeat, he turned back one last time. You used to love me. I used to love the man I thought you were, I replied, but that man never existed, did he? That man was just a character you played while you figured out how to steal from me. David drove away without another word, leaving me standing on the porch of the house I'd worked so hard to buy. For the first time in 8 months, I felt like I could breathe freely. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Stone called. They want to negotiate. David's apparently very interested in settling this quickly and quietly. Something about his girlfriend not being as supportive as expected when she learned about the actual numbers. I typed back, tell Mr. Stone that Mr. Martinez can communicate his settlement offers through proper legal channels. And Patricia, make sure those offers reflect the reality of his situation, not his fantasies. The war was over. David had fired the first shot with his text message demanding a divorce. But I had won the battle before it even began, because I'd spent weeks preparing while he'd spent weeks dreaming about spending my money with his mistress. Now came the cleanup phase, and I intended to be just as thorough with that as I had been with everything else. The next 72 hours were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. David's carefully constructed world was collapsing, and I had a front row seat to watch it all fall apart. The first crack came Thursday morning at 6:23 a.m. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a woman's voice, young, panicked, and unmistakably desperate. Is this Sarah Martinez? Yes. Who is this? This is Jessica Reynolds. I think we need to talk. I almost laughed. After 8 months of being the other woman, Jessica suddenly wanted to have a conversation with the wife she'd helped betray. I'm sorry, Jessica, but I don't think we have anything to discuss. If you have legal concerns related to the divorce, you'll need to contact my attorney. Please just listen to me for 1 minute, she pleaded. David lied to me. He told me you guys were already separated. He said you were keeping him in a loveless marriage just to control him financially. You never would have what? Helped him steal money from our joint accounts? Helped him plan to maximize his divorce settlement? Helped him destroy a 14-year marriage? I didn't know about any of that. David told me he was planning to leave you, but he never said anything about taking your money. He said he had his own savings, his own business plans. Now I did laugh. Jessica, you're a real estate agent. You specialize in high-end properties. You're telling me you never wondered how a failed entrepreneur was planning to afford the lifestyle he was promising you? There was a long silence. When Jessica spoke again, her voice was smaller. How much is he actually getting? That's between David and his lawyer. Please, I need to know. I've already put deposits down on things. I've made commitments based on what he told me we'd have. Then I suggest you contact David about getting those deposits back. But Jessica, next time you decide to help a married man destroy his wife's life, maybe do a little more research first. I hung up, but the call had given me valuable information. Jessica was panicking, which meant David had probably told her about the real settlement amount. Their alliance was fracturing exactly as I'd predicted. The second call came an hour later. This time it was Marcus Webb. Sarah, this is Marcus, David's friend. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Marcus. I know exactly what you've been doing. You've been coaching my husband on how to replicate your own divorce strategy. You helped him plan this betrayal for months. Look, I was just trying to help a friend who was unhappy in his marriage. I didn't know he was. I mean, the Jessica thing wasn't my idea, but the financial planning was, wasn't it? The asset research, the legal strategy, the timing advice, that was all you. Marcus's silence confirmed everything I suspected. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus, I continued. You're going to stay out of my divorce. You're going to stop coaching David on legal strategies. And you're going to pray that I don't decide to investigate whether you gave him any advice that crossed the line into legal territory. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. David thought he was smarter than me too. Look how that turned out for him. By Thursday evening, David had called me 17 times. I hadn't answered any of them, but his voicemails were getting increasingly desperate. Sarah, please call me back. Jessica broke up with me. She said this wasn't what she signed up for. My lawyer says we might be able to work something out if you're willing to negotiate. I'm staying at a motel on Colfax. This is insane. We can fix this. Sarah, goddammit, pick up the phone. I deleted each voicemail without listening to the end. David had chosen to communicate through lawyers. He could stick with that choice. But the most interesting development came Friday afternoon when Patricia called with news that made me smile for the first time all week. Sarah, you're not going to believe this. David's lawyer just called requesting an emergency meeting. Apparently, David wants to withdraw the divorce petition entirely. He wants to what? He wants to call the whole thing off. Stone says his client has realized he made a terrible mistake and wants to try marriage counseling instead. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. David had expected to walk away with over $1 million and a young girlfriend. Instead, he was looking at $127,000 and sleeping alone in a cheap motel while his former mistress blocked his calls. What did you tell Mr. Stone? I told him I'd discuss it with my client, but that Mrs. Martinez has moved on with her life and is looking forward to finalizing the divorce as quickly as possible. That's exactly right. David made his choice when he sent that text message. He doesn't get to unmake it just because the consequences aren't what he expected. That weekend brought the most satisfying moment of the entire ordeal. I was at the grocery store Saturday morning when I heard a familiar voice in the next aisle. I'm telling you, Mom, I had no idea what he was really planning. He told me she was this cold, controlling woman who was making his life miserable. I peeked around the corner and saw Jessica on her phone, looking exhausted and stressed. Her usually perfect hair was in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing sweats instead of her typical designer outfits. No, we can't afford the condo anymore. The down payment I gave them. I don't know if I can get it back. I continued shopping, but I couldn't help overhearing more of her conversation. He's been calling me nonstop, but what am I supposed to do? I'm 27 years old, Mom. I can't support a 44-year-old man who's going through a messy divorce, especially not when it turns out he's basically broke. As I was checking out, Jessica approached me in the parking lot. Up close, she looked even worse. Dark circles under her eyes, stress lines around her mouth. Sarah, please, can we just talk for 5 minutes? I think you've said enough, Jessica. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, but David made me believe things that weren't true. He told me you were having an affair. He said you'd already filed for divorce and were just trying to take him for everything he had. I stopped loading groceries into my car and looked at her directly. Jessica, even if every word of that had been true, which it wasn't, you still would have been sleeping with a married man. You still would have been helping him plan to take as much money as possible from his wife. The details don't change what you chose to do. I know. I've never been involved in anything like this before. I got caught up in the fantasy he was selling. The fantasy of living off another woman's hard work. Jessica winced. It wasn't supposed to be like that. It was exactly like that. You just didn't want to admit it to yourself. I closed my car door and started to leave, but Jessica called after me. What's going to happen to him? I turned back. David is going to learn what it's like to live on his own earnings for the first time in 14 years. He's going to discover that being a mediocre salesman in his mid-40s doesn't fund the lifestyle he became accustomed to while married to a successful woman. And hopefully he's going to figure out that actions have consequences. And what about you? I'm going to be fine, Jessica. I was successful before David. I was successful during my marriage to David, and I'll be successful after David. The difference is, now I don't have to support a grown man who resents me for being better at life than he is. That evening, I was home alone for the first time in years, and instead of feeling lonely, I felt peaceful. My house was quiet, but it was my house, my space. No one was going to come home and make bitter comments about my success. No one was going to lie to my face while planning to steal from me. My sister called around 8 p.m. I'd told her about the divorce earlier in the week, though I hadn't given her all the details about David's betrayal. How are you holding up, Sarah? Better than I expected, honestly. I think I've been mourning this marriage for months without realizing it. Are you sure you don't want me to come stay with you for a while? I'm sure. I need some time to just exist in my own space without having to consider anyone else's feelings or needs. I'm proud of you, you know? A lot of women would have fallen apart or gotten emotional and made bad decisions. You handled this like the badass businesswoman you are. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive bottle David and I had been saving for our 15th anniversary next month, and sat on my back deck looking at the garden I'd planted and maintained while he was busy planning my destruction. My phone buzzed with another call from David. This time I answered. Sarah, thank God. We need to talk about this. I've made terrible mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you. David, you don't love me. You love the financial security I provided. You love having someone else pay your bills and fund your lifestyle, but you don't love me. That's not true. I was confused. I was going through something, but you were going through something for 8 months? You planned this divorce for a year because you were confused? Jessica means nothing to me. It was stupid. I was having a midlife crisis or something. A midlife crisis that involves stealing $35.00 from our accounts and planning to steal $1 million more? I wasn't stealing. I was. Look, none of that matters now. What matters is that we're married. We took vows. For better or worse, remember? I remember my vows, David. I kept them for 14 years while you were planning to break them in the most devastating way possible. But vows work both ways, and you broke yours the moment you decided to betray me. One mistake shouldn't end a marriage. This wasn't one mistake. This was a systematic campaign of lies, theft, and emotional abuse that lasted for months. This was you deciding that my feelings, my trust, and my financial security were all acceptable casualties in your quest to upgrade your life. David was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, more desperate. I don't have anywhere to go, Sarah. Jessica won't return my calls. Marcus won't even talk to me. I'm living in a motel room, and I can barely afford that. That's what happens when you burn bridges, David. You destroyed your marriage, your affair, and your friendship in the span of 1 week. Those are the consequences of your choices. Please, I'll sign a post-nuptial agreement. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever you want. What I want is a divorce. What I want is to never again have to wonder if the person sharing my bed is secretly planning to destroy my life. What I want is to build a future with someone who celebrates my success instead of resenting it. There's someone else? The panic in his voice was obvious. No, David, there's no one else. Unlike you, when I make a commitment, I keep it. But I'm 42 years old, financially secure, and now I know exactly what kind of man I refuse to waste any more time on. I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia and tell her to finally finalize the divorce as quickly as possible. I would start the process of officially reclaiming my life. But tonight, I was going to finish my wine, enjoy the silence of my own home, and plan the next chapter of a life that would be entirely my own. 3 months later, I was sitting in my newly redecorated home office, reviewing quarterly reports, when Patricia called with the news I'd been waiting for. "It's official, Sarah. The divorce decree was signed this morning. You're a free woman." I set down my coffee and smiled. How did the final settlement turn out? Exactly as we planned. David received his $127,000, which covers his legal fees with about $89,000 left over. The house, your retirement accounts, your investment portfolio, and your business assets all remained with you as separate property, thanks to the financial restructuring we implemented. And his reaction? Stone said his client was disappointed, but ready to move forward. Apparently, David has found a small apartment in Thornton and is working for a new tech startup, entry-level sales position. After I hung up, I walked through my house, truly my house now, and marveled at how different everything felt. I'd redecorated the master bedroom, turning David's office into a reading room, and converted the basement into a home gym. Every change had been my choice, my vision, my investment in my own happiness. The transformation hadn't been just physical. Over the past 3 months, I'd discovered parts of myself that had been buried under years of trying to manage David's wounded ego and financial irresponsibility. I'd started taking art classes on Thursday evenings, joined a hiking group that met on weekends, and even signed up for salsa dancing lessons. "You seem different," my colleague Jennifer had commented last week. "Lighter, somehow." She was right. I felt like I'd been carrying a heavy weight for years without realizing it, and suddenly, that weight was gone. I no longer had to carefully phrase discussions about money to avoid hurting David's feelings. I no longer had to pretend that his failed business ventures were just temporary setbacks. I no longer had to wonder if the person I was building a life with was secretly planning to tear it down. The vindication had been swift and complete. Within a month of our confrontation, David's fantasy life had completely collapsed. Jessica had not only dumped him, but had also filed a complaint with her real estate company claiming that David had misrepresented his financial situation to manipulate her into a relationship. Her career had survived, but barely. Marcus, terrified that I might pursue legal action against him for his role in the conspiracy, had apparently ended his friendship with David entirely. According to Rebecca, who I'd kept on retainer to monitor any attempts at retaliation, Marcus had told mutual friends that he wanted nothing to do with David's drama. But the most satisfying outcome had been David's attempts to rebuild his life. Without access to my income and assets, he'd been forced to confront the reality of his own earning potential. The luxury lifestyle he'd become accustomed to, the expensive dinners, the designer clothes, the weekend trips had disappeared overnight. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that David was struggling. His new apartment was a studio in a complex where the rent was $900 a month. His new job paid $38 annually with commission potential that he wasn't meeting. The man who had planned to steal over $1 million from me was now living paycheck to paycheck. "Do you ever feel bad for him?" my sister had asked during our weekly phone call last month. "I feel bad for the man I thought I married," I'd answered honestly, "but I don't feel bad for David Martinez because that man made his choices with full knowledge of what he was risking. He gambled our marriage on a get-rich-quick scheme that involved betraying the person who loved him most. He lost. That's not my fault or my responsibility. The professional consequences had been significant too. David's reputation in Denver's business community was essentially destroyed. Word had gotten out about the divorce details, probably through Jessica's real estate connections, and potential clients and business partners had quietly distanced themselves. It's hard to trust someone in business when everyone knows he tried to steal from his own wife. Meanwhile, my career had flourished. Without the stress of David's resentment and the constant drain of his financial irresponsibility, I'd been able to focus entirely on my work. I'd successfully negotiated 2 major client acquisitions that would boost the firm's revenue by 15% this year, and there was already talk of promoting me to senior vice president. "You're on fire lately," my boss had told me during my performance review. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up." What I was doing differently was living authentically for the first time in years. I wasn't walking on eggshells around a fragile male ego. I wasn't downplaying my achievements to make someone else feel better about their failures. I wasn't subsidizing someone else's dreams while being made to feel guilty about my own success. The dating question came up occasionally. Well-meaning friends and family members would ask if I was ready to get back out there, but the truth was, I wasn't in any hurry. I was enjoying discovering who Sarah Martinez was when she wasn't defined by her role as David's wife and financial caretaker. "You're glowing," my hairdresser had commented during my appointment yesterday. "New boyfriend? New life," I'd corrected her. Same woman, just without the dead weight. But perhaps the most meaningful change had been in my relationship with money itself. For years, I'd felt almost guilty about my financial success, because David had made it clear that it was a source of tension in our marriage. I'd downplayed promotions, hidden bonuses, and avoided talking about investments because I didn't want to make him feel inadequate. Now, I celebrated every professional victory. I'd bought myself a new car, a BMW that I'd wanted for years but hadn't purchased, because David had made comments about showing off. I'd renovated my kitchen with the expensive appliances I'd been dreaming about. I'd started a travel fund for the European vacation I'd been planning before David's resentment made it impossible. You've earned every penny of this, I told myself while reviewing my investment portfolio, and no one else gets to make you feel bad about that. The legal aftermath had been educational too. Patricia had explained how many women in similar situations made critical mistakes by being too emotional or too trusting during divorce proceedings. You did everything right, she'd told me. You gathered evidence, protected your assets, and didn't let sentiment cloud your judgment. Most people in your situation would have confronted their spouse immediately and lost any strategic advantage. I learned a long time ago that business and emotions don't mix well, I'd replied. Apparently that applies to divorce too. The house felt different now, not just because of the renovations, but because it was filled with my energy instead of the toxic combination of my ambition and David's resentment. I'd hosted my first dinner party last month, inviting friends and colleagues over to celebrate my promotion. The evening had been filled with laughter, intelligent conversation, and genuine celebration of success. This place feels so much more. You, my friend Lisa had observed. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like the house is finally reflecting the person who actually lives in it. She was right. For years, this house had been a compromise between my taste and David's preferences, my financial ability and his comfort level. Now it was entirely mine, a reflection of my achievements, my choices, my vision of what home should feel like. Looking back, I could see that the marriage had been over long before David sent that text message. It had ended the moment he decided that my success was a threat to his masculinity, rather than an asset to our partnership. It had ended when he chose resentment over pride, theft over honesty, betrayal over communication. The text message hadn't ended our marriage. It had just made the ending official. But in a strange way, I was almost grateful to David for his betrayal. If he hadn't been so greedy, so obvious, so sloppy in his planning, I might have spent years more in a marriage where I was constantly diminishing myself to protect someone else's ego. His affair and his divorce scheme had forced me to see our relationship clearly for the first time in years. And what I'd seen was that I'd been married to a man who saw me as an ATM with benefits rather than a partner to celebrate and support. The woman I am now, confident, unapologetic about her success, clear about her worth, she wouldn't have tolerated David's resentment for 5 minutes, let alone 5 years. The woman I am now knows that the right person celebrates your achievements instead of being threatened by them. The woman I am now understands that love isn't about diminishing yourself to make someone else feel bigger. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be even more yourself, not less. As I finished my work for the day and prepared dinner for one in my beautiful kitchen, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. David had tried to destroy me financially and emotionally. Instead, he'd freed me from a relationship that was slowly killing my spirit. His plan to steal my money had failed spectacularly. His plan to upgrade to a younger woman had collapsed within weeks. His plan to start over with my assets had left him starting over with almost nothing. But my plan to protect what I'd built and reclaim my life had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Tonight, I would eat dinner in peace, watch whatever I wanted on television, and go to bed knowing that no one was lying beside me while planning my destruction. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a house that belonged entirely to me, go to a job where my success was celebrated, and continue building a life that reflected my values and achievements. What do you think of this story? Have you ever felt that your success or achievements were treated as a threat by someone who should have been supporting you? Sometimes the hardest lesson to learn is that not everyone in your life is genuinely happy for your success. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from others who've experienced similar situations. Thank you for reading my story, and thank you for all the support. It means more than you know.